what's the way to work with Spark DataFrames.cache? How should we exactly use it? When exactly? And when should we not be using it? Because the .cache method, it's true. It will make things faster, but there are situations where it would make things slower. Also, it's important to notice when exactly are we going to use it and how. So basically, if we do multiple operations on a Spark DataFrame, DataFrame.filter, DataFrame.select, DataFrame.filter, DataFrame.whatever, then at a certain point we can stack there DataFrame.cache. And later on, when we would have the action, let's say .count, then this would get cached and we could reuse this. Okay, so we already see that we can cache multiple data frames, and the cache under the hood would try to fit the data frame into both memory and also disk. It's important to note that DataFrame.persist will accept a parameter where we would tell it whether we want it to be cached only to memory, only to disk, off to memory and disk. And there are a couple of more options there. So basically, whenever we do this, we want to do this on parts of data frames that would repeat themselves. And if this part is a huge, gigantic part, we probably don't want to do this because it could possibly not fit our memory and disk. Okay, so maybe there are other ways of optimizing our Spark data frames working such that we would not need to reuse this data frame at all. So when we cache a data frame, we create a new variable for it. It's best to create a new variable for it because then we could reference it later. If we don't do this, we would not have a way to reference this data frame unless we use create or replace global temp view. In this case, we could also cache it and then reference it in Spark SQL as cache. Also, it's important to unpersist data frame after it's no longer needed. So we call a data frame that we have cached previously .unpersist. This will prevent from having the caching layer becoming pool. If it's pool, Spark will be able to manage it. It would start removing evicting data from memory in an LRU style, least recently used strategy. But it's a good practice when you know that you don't need anymore the cache to just call explicitly the unpersist and unload the memory and the disk, and this would save us from all this LRU hassle. Next tip is to just cache whatever we exactly actually need in the queries and not just cache everything, including things that we don't need. This includes both data frames and columns. If we have 100 columns returning from a query and we cache this data frame because we need only one column out of them, this does not make sense. We could make better use of our memory and first do DataFrame.select column 1 and only then cache this data frame. At this point, I want to repeat. What do we cache? We do DataFrame.filter, DataFrame.select, DataFrame.filter, DataFrame, whatever. And before we actually make the action, we call DataFrame.cache, which would not cache at this point, only at the point where we actually make an action like DataFrame.count, DataFrame.collect, and etc. There is an overhead to the cache. So as we said, if we have small data frames, and we reuse them over and over, it might make sense to cache them. But if we have gigantic tens of gigabytes of data frame, then converting them to a data structure that we want to fit in memory and then placing them in memory and then later on evicting them All this will consume some time, so we should take note of when we want to cache and when we don't want to cache. Want to cache on smaller data frames, on specific columns that we are going to use over and over. Check if there are no other solutions before caching, and cache exactly what we need.